Hello and welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Soebbing. Today we're going to be bringing you a chat between me and Tiffany Jawor-Smith, who I worked with when we were developing my first fabric collection, Nocturne, for QT Fabrics. It was a collaborative collection with them where we worked with some existing prints that they have from their long history as a fabric company, and then also brought my vision to life. So we talk about the process of melding my vision with their capabilities of creating the artwork, and we get to take a look into that process. Now, if you're seeing this, that means that we have opened up orders again for Nocturne. So we ordered additional fabric beyond what we pre-sold, and that is now available on our website, shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. Now, this collection is done really well for QT Fabrics, so they're going to be putting in a second order. So if it sells out, then it's going to be going to back order. Now, some of it we're going to be able to fill from extra stock that QT has. Some of it we might have to wait until June when the fabric comes back in. So you won't know for sure if you're placing your back order, but you will get it. It might just take a little bit of time. All right, let's chat with Tiffany and we can show you the process from concept all the way to finished fabric. Well, Tiffany, thanks for taking some time out today to chat with me about Nocturne, which we developed together for QT.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited. It's been such a great process.
It has. It was a long process, but I'm really excited with the results.
Yes, it started a long time ago and there were some delays, but we got there and it was so worth the wait.
It was. It definitely was. So first of all, to give everybody a background, Tiffany approached me, it's got to be a couple years ago now, about doing a collaborative collection with QT, and I said yes immediately, because essentially what it meant was that I got to do a collection without having to actually do the artwork, which was the intimidating part. Tiffany and her team handled that, and I came up with the concept and a lot of the colors. And so they brought it to life beautifully, and so you can thank them for making it look as fantastic as it does. But I thought it might be fun for everyone to kind of go through that process with us and kind of figure out how we all got on the same page and eventually, came up with the fabric that we have today. So why don't you first say what a collaborative collection is, because I'm not the only one you've done it with, and maybe what some of the other examples are.
Sure. So we call these curated collections because we reach out to experts in the industry that the quilters know and love. We want the end user, which is the quilters and the quilt shops, to really feel confident in the purchase of the fabric that they're buying. Yes, we have an amazing studio, and we work with all sorts of artists as well as internally. But we also wanted to bring that end user, the quilt, the final product, more to the forefront in the concept of designing a collection. So a curated collection really, it's totally a team experience. It's really picking your brain as an expert in your field, quilting, designing patterns, and making it so that the designs really feed into the end product. And so that the collaboration is all about, getting the results that quilters are asking for that we may not think of all the time when we're in our design studio. So it's that collaboration, that integration of the product and the design.
And this is kind of like a side project of what you normally do and are actually responsible for at QT.
Right. So in my previous worlds, I used to work in the studio at this company, and then I've morphed into more marketing. And now my title right now is creative manager. And what that means is I help creatively manage patterns, I kind of been the liaison with design and marketing, and also working with social media, working with opportunities like this. And this is something that we decided to do. Like you just said, it feeds my soul. I love design and I love working with you all. And so having that connection and bringing it to the forefront with design kind of makes it full circle. So my design background can come back into my job for a little bit and I can be a little more creative and help with the drawing and the styling of the collection, and then working with you and then following it through to this kind of opportunity with the patterns and what else is ever, all the other things that are coming from it.
And we've done a couple of interviews with designers on the channel lately, but I thought this would be like a really cool process because we can show exactly how we went from concept to actual finished product, because we have all the artwork that we were sharing back and forth over the creation of the collection. So you guys can kind of see a behind the scenes look. It'll be pretty fun, I think. So one of the first things that we did was Tiffany and I sat down and we thought, okay, well, if I were to do a collection, what would it be? And two things like immediately came to mind, and that was my love of chalk paint, which is pretty much my only hobby now because quilting has become a job. I still love it, but most of the stuff that I work on is for work. So whenever I can get a free weekend, I love to do chalk paint. So you're going to see some of the things that I've done in my own home that helped inspire some of these prints. And then also I have an obsession with vintage owls. Owls were my sorority's animal. And when I went to college, owls were not cool. So the only thing we could get our hands on were vintage owls. And so we had this collection of horribly ugly but awesome vintage owls like my entire adult life. So we're going to see some of those that I have around the house as well. And so we wanted to kind of combine those two things for the collection. So what I'm going to show you first, I'm going to share my screen here. And we're going to take a look at some of the things that we looked at to kind of get this going. So one of the first things I did was I sent Tiffany just some ideas so we could get on the same page. So I sent her a bunch of pictures of things that are in my home. This is decor that's in my bedroom and in my living room, to kind of give her a sense of my style and my color palette. The piano, I still have not painted Napoleonic blue, but someday when my children can be in school and daycare again, that's going to happen. And then just some other things around. You can see my succulent collection has gotten a little bit larger and more obsessive since I first sent this to you. But I included this upper middle picture because it's one of the pieces that I chalk painted. And there's a nice graphite underneath there with just a dry brushing of one of the Annie Sloan colors that we started to use. So one of the things that we did was we took the Annie Sloan color card, which is one of my favorites to use, and we pulled a lot of that in. So you're going to see that in the pieces that I painted around my house, that we kind of have my favorites that we used. And they didn't really at the time have a really good green, so we kind of came up with our own citron. And we now have my dearly departed dog is in here as well. I included her. I think I told you that I hated the design of the pillow in the background, but I wanted to show you the dog and the teal pillow that she was sleeping so cutely on top of as well. So from there, Tiffany, you put together a couple of mood boards. Oh, and we're also kind of grappling on the idea of like stencil painting, because that's another big element of chalk paint. So that's kind of where the trellis and the stenciling came into as well. We thought a cool stenciled looking owl would be a fun way to go. So why don't you take it over here?
Sure. So you'll see that the color here is not at all what we just looked at, and it's very rough. So this is a concept board throwing things together. What I did was I go through all of our archive of fabrics and prints that we have. We have an amazing archive of artwork that we've had, and we have books from since 1850. So I was hoping to be able to find, a few of those pieces that we could incorporate into this, and we actually ended up incorporating one from the original archives.
I've got that will show in a little bit.
Right, and it was I love that one. But what's cool is that just seeing all of your inspiration really gave me a flavor to like what your end result would be. And if you looked at the beginning and you looked at the end, you'll say, oh, I get it. But in the middle, it might look a little squishy. It might, it could kind of took some turns. So that first board was very different from what we ended up with, but it was important for the process. So we sent that, and that was, those had a little bit more painterly style, kind of like that, motif, the medallions and things. And so then the next one is just a little bit closer to what we ended up with, but there's that cool texture in the middle that I thought was very chalk painty, and we kind of were agreeing that that was cool. And then some of the more medallion pieces, and then of course that the bottom right, which is just a beautiful armoire. So lots of just putting stuff out there and you being able to go, yes, no, maybe. And then after that, I believe, you shared even more inspiration so that we could kind of hone in on what exactly was really kind of catching your eye.
And so from there, I kind of thought for sure that with the long history that QT has, that at some point somebody would have done an owl. And then you searched all through the archives and you couldn't find a single one.
And there was the delay, because
Yes.
as much as I wanted to do this, to have to do everything from scratch was going to take longer. Not that we didn't want to, but we were like, oh, we really want to get this owl right. So I was surprised. I think I found one owl, and it was from the 60s, and it was very tiny. It was on this little tree. I think I sent that to you at one point. It was funny. But nothing. It was so surprising. So if anything screams, we need our own, special owl. I think the history of our company was saying, this is going to be all Stephanie. So it was perfect.
All right. Well, let me pull up the slide that we did do that you ended up sharing here. So this is what we ended up coming up with. So this is the one you found in the archives that became that sort of trellis print that is repeated throughout the collection.
Right. So as I mentioned, we have these books that have, I think, probably 100. And they're all the prints that we've printed since around the 1850s. And some are just stripes, some are dots, but then some have more novelty, like the one that had the owl. It's really just a time machine of design, and it's so fun. This one that actually was one that was from the 1920s, surprisingly, because it looks much more modern, like in the 60s. But yeah, it had that. Those books have production notes. How many screens there were, when it was printed, who approved it. It's really cool as part of our history. So that particular one was a great find for this mid-century modern / owl.
And then that inspired not just the print that, we recolored, but also the background of the owl that ended up becoming that.
Exactly.
All right, so from there you worked with an outside company to create the owl, and they came back with a couple of options.
Right. So we had a bunch of options, and, at first it's hard to, now this is where your experience in quilting and, color really comes into play, because you have to be able to kind of anticipate what it will look like in the end. I was pretty clear, this is very rough. This is just an illustration. We're just trying to get a feel for the actual owl. So if you look at the owls in these, they were inspired by those trivets and the things that we put on the mood board loosely. The artist did a great job rendering something from like all of the direction that we gave. And then we really wanted to do something to go with the owl. So it wasn't just this owl plunked on fabric. So that's where the trellis came into play.
And what we ended up doing was we got them back, and you can see, the owl that we ended up using is in there, but the trellis was not as modern as we like. So we came back with some notes. We shared some stencils from one of my favorite chalk painting supply sites, and I went through and did some math on how we needed to make it work. So that way for those owls, you could fussy cut them out without losing anything. And to me, as a quilter and as a designer, that was incredibly important, because you don't want to lose every other owl, because you don't want to buy a yard of fabric and only be able to use half of it because you keep losing all of them. So here is what ended up happening from there. So this was ultimately the owl we ended up going with. And then I sent back some information of here's one way we can do it. And then you guys reworked it even more to where they ended up being side by side, and that trellis ended up in between. But here are just some options of coloring that we were kind of looking at as we were getting there. And you can see the design inspiration was coming in. And then this is ultimately the setting. But as you can see, we still had a lot of work to do with color at this point.
Right. And so as you can see, that one little print from the 20s really kind of brought it together in the end. The owl was great from the artist, and then I ended up working with the trellis and one of our internal artists, and we just kept hashing it out, really trying to simplify it and make it more mid-century modern.
and we've got that cool painterly texture behind it. And this was, I don't know, maybe like a year into when you guys had moved to all digital for your printing process. So I know that you guys were like trying to push the boundaries and do a lot of painterly textures. And I think I was like, hey, let's just keep it in the background and let's just do solid for the different parts of the owl. And I really like how it ended up popping after that.
Yeah, it's funny looking back now, we forget how much it did, how much it does morph during the process, because it looks dull there, where in the end it pops, like you said. But that's kind of what's great about the creative collaboration with you, is that yes, I work with quilters all the time and I think about things, but when you mention a specific size for a fussy cut, or every other owl, in maximizing the usage of the fabric, that's stuff that we hear all the time. But to actually put the two things together when designing the collection was huge, and it's really actually inspired a lot going forward. We have worked, you had mentioned early on that we did work with a couple other people with the curated collections, and each person brings something new to the table, their technique. Yours was the fussy cutting and the very specific owls. Another one might be, we really want to focus just on color, or we don't care what, not we don't care, but we're not as picky about design or as specific about design. We really need it to be the dark, medium, light, that quilters like when you do a 3-yard quilt, let's say. So it's really interesting. And I was glad that I learned that from you, because I try to apply that going forward with the studio.
So this was one of the iterations where we were still kind of narrowing it down, but you can see a lot of these did end up making it into the collection. And then this, once we kind of hammered down the different prints that were going to be in it, you kind of went wild and gave me a bunch of colors based on what we had originally talked about. So this was one of the options. And then you sent me a bunch of actual printouts of many of these. And I think there were even more in the printouts, but this was just an example of how many you have to choose from. And originally you were telling me 14 prints, and I was like, oh Lord, how are we going to make that happen?
And it's funny, there are, we have varying collections, different sizes of different kinds. This particular collection, when I spoke with the design director, we were pretty clear that we wanted to keep it a mid-size collection. And it's just gut instinct. It's from what we know, like if you offer too many, you're going to be, almost overwhelming the buyer. If you are very focused with, 14 or less, then you're really kind of making them understand why you chose those designs and really making the marriage of the design and the quilting go together. So it is tough for even us. We're always like, oh, can we add one more? Can we add one more? But in the end, you see why, because in the end you have this really great cohesive collection.
So what happened was I got a bunch of printouts printed on this beautiful paper, and so and they were at scale. So I was laying them out and looking at it, and I got them like right before I was scheduled to deliver a baby. And I remember we were having conversations, we were getting close to it. I was like, hey, I think we need to be able to finalize this before this date, or I don't think I'm going to be able to make it happen because I'm going to have a newborn baby. And so we hurried, we got it. And so I had these things in hand, and okay, so we're going to take a little detour here. So I was scheduled to be induced. I was like 39 weeks pregnant. I was ready to be done. And my doctor was like, well, you can come in at midnight and I'll induce you then, because you'll be 39 weeks. We can legally do that. And then you can have the baby by Tuesday morning and I can deliver, or you have to wait until Friday when I'm on call again. And this was like a Monday night or Monday when this was happening. I was like, I am not waiting another half a week being pregnant. I'm done. I've had enough of this. And so it sounded like a fabulous idea at the time. So I went home, I filmed a video tutorial, I finished a quilt top, and then I went and reviewed all these images, and I'm at the dining room table and my mother was there. She came out to watch my daughter while I was going to go into the hospital, and she's like, Stephanie, don't you think you should be taking a nap? And I'm like, I will. I just need to get this to them because I don't want the process to be held up when I go into the hospital. And so then I slept for like 2 hours.
But you texted me and you were like, yeah, I'm going to go. And I'm like, are you okay? oh, all right, so we'll be fine. And you were like, no, no, I'm doing a video right now. And then you had told me you were going to do all that. And I'm thinking, wow, that's amazing. So, and you did, you totally did it.
I got it all to you. I got you my notes. They were very detailed, so that way you guys could keep, making some changes. And it was a stupid thing looking back on it. I should have just waited, not induce myself at midnight. So when I go in, they induced me, and my epidural didn't work in one section. And so I felt the whole thing. It was bad. And then, so I was up all night. I had worked all day, stupidly. And then I'm in pain, significant pain. And then the baby got stuck. And so by the time it came time to push, it wasn't happening. And she wasn't coming out. And the heart rate dropped. And I ended up having an emergency C-section in the middle of all this. And while that was happening, you were making changes. But I got a pretty baby out of it, so we're going to show you some baby pictures here. So this is what I had while you were making your changes. I had my little baby, and worked real hard to make her too. And she's so cute. She's so big now. She's 21 pounds. It's crazy. She's giant. She eats everything. But anyway, back to quilt stuff. So this was when you guys went and made some color changes. This is what you sent to me and said, hey, these are our suggested options. And you made some changes to sizes of the owls. Like you can see some of the owls are on a bigger scale than others, for what QT suggested for size wise. And then you and I got together on a Zoom call, kind of like this one. And it was right in the middle of baby nap time. I had just gotten her down to sleep, and we quick got on a Zoom and we narrowed it down from there to the end. And I remember at one point we had one image in, and it was a color that was in the original Annie Sloan color palette that we were using, but it just didn't fit anymore once we had narrowed everything out. And I kind of said to you, I was like, I feel like this is when you get a collection and you wonder why in the heck is this color in it. I feel like this is what happened. You've narrowed out a ton, and you just didn't narrow out that one too. And so we really honed it in at that point.
And that was a great process because we ended up using before we had to. Now with everybody using Zoom, we used the technology of Zoom. And I think I was in Photoshop, and I shared my screen, and I was moving stuff around on that big canvas. So it was you and I were together doing on a quilt wall or something. It was great. It was very integrated and very, it was fun. I had a blast.
It was a lot of fun because I'd be like, okay, what if we change this to this color? And it was instantaneous. And, I've been quarantined for longer than everybody else because I had to stay home after the C-section. So I've been at home since late January of 2020.
Yeah, I can imagine. That's right. You have just a little bit of a quarantine.
I had 2 weeks of freedom between when I could drive again and when everything got shut down. But yeah, it was nuts. A nuts year.
It feels like 40 years ago too, I have to say. It feels like a year, a minute, and then it feels. And looking back, it's very interesting to see because you forget where it came from.
So then this was the final collection that we ended up coming with, and you can see all the different SKUs. Although it looks like our green owl isn't in here. I'll have to hold up the green owl.
Yeah, but the white on white was important. Yeah, that's the one that's not.
Yeah.
In there. That came out of the, towards the end, those, what are they called? Low volume prints, right?
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that was put in.
So one of the things that I really wanted was to make sure that we didn't have too many of these low volume prints. So we had a version of the owl too that was like that, but I wanted it all to contrast with the low volume so that we essentially had two background options. And that came, you keep talking about the designer perspective, that was exactly out of that, because I've designed so many quilts using fat quarter bundles, and when you have 4, 5, 6 low volume options, it becomes difficult to use an entire collection in a quilt because there's too many low volume options, and you can't get it all in there if you want to.
But it came together so nicely.
It did. And thank you and your team. Like, I never would have had this come together if it weren't for your guys' expertise and ability to actually create this on the computer.
Well, you're really good at it. I remember working with you thinking, wow, you really get it. And not everybody gets it, and that's okay. And like you said, you're not necessarily painting it or, drawing it from scratch, but it's yours. It's definitely all your vision.
All right. Is there anything else about the collaborative process that you could think of we need to chat about?
Well, you could talk about your ending products, your quilts, your kits,
Yes.
the bag. So many creations. That bag is one of your favorites in your shop, right?
So this was the tourist tote that Jessica Vandenberg of So Many Creations, who's a friend of QT and a friend of Quilt Addicts Anonymous. This is one of our favorites and best-selling patterns of all time that we have, and people love this video. So I really thought that this would make a great one in the tote because you could really put that owl front and center, fussy cut that out, and then I thought that the paint almost looks a little bit like cork, and so that it would make a good bottom and handle, but you could get that look without paying the price of cork. So we did that in the teal and then also in the black, and we have lots of other quilts here too. And it was really fun to sort of think of, okay, what patterns do I already have that this could be made really well in, and what ones can I create? So the night sky was created just for this collection, and it was just really kind of fun to fit that in there. And in the case of trellis, we had made that before in another collection for our Stash with Stephanie Club, and I ended up reworking the size a little bit because the owls, once we changed the size on them, I had to reduce the size down a little bit on the pattern. So we have a special edition pattern for trellis just for Nocturne, and I think it looks so much better in Nocturne than it did in the original because we gave it that eye a place to rest. We're able to incorporate all those fussy cut owls that are going out at you, and then you really show off the fabrics and all those plus signs. They just look really, really pretty.
It's really funny because all of the quilts and colors and everything you sent, if you look behind me, that's my entire house is that color. So it's like, I want to get my hands on that quilt and put it in my living room.
We kept going back and forth and being like, we're going to do just fine on this together because we pretty much had the same design sense.
Yeah,
and
we're lucky.
Yes.
We had to edit a lot because we kept saying, oh, what about this? What about that? But
Mm-hmm.
in the end, I mean, all of the projects you did looked amazing. And it was really eye-opening for me to see. I've always been told in the studio with quilting, when I was in the studio, like, beware of fussy cutting. Quilters don't want to fussy cut, just so you know. That's been something that I've always been. And when you mentioned that engineered, very specific owl, everything in me was like, I don't know. But then I'm like, no, trust the process. Trust, this is why we're doing this, is to get us out, QT, out of our comfort zone, right? And to kind of learn. And so that was a really great lesson for us that, it's not wrong or right. It's the right or wrong time maybe, or, not somebody's taste level or their type of technique. But your video you already did with the fussy cutting, that was amazing. So there's a lid for every pot. And I'm glad that we, that we went forward with it. And I think it really came out beautifully. The textures, the colors are all just beautiful.
Well, it certainly has already sold well for us, and I currently have more people on wait lists than I have people who bought it in the first place to pre-order. So yeah, it's people are loving it. Of course, they also know me. So, but it looks like it's been doing well for you guys too, for people who don't know me.
Exactly.
So that's good.
Right.
I know you guys are doing a reorder.
You have your own core audience. If you have somebody that, your loyal fan, selfishly, that's additionally great for us as a company to work with you, because then we get your fans as well and we kind of collaborate, right? It is a business after all. But the other thing is that you might, people might start saying, oh, who's Quilt Addicts Anonymous? I wasn't aware. And especially with your online presence, which is great, it really helped, I think, that they could go and see all of your projects and really kind of take a look. So I think it was a win-win for sure.
I've already heard, because we've got our night sky kits are already shipped out if people just ordered that. And I've already heard from one person who has not used QT before that is loving the feel of the fabrics and loving working with them. So hopefully we'll introduce a lot of people to QT and how lovely their fabrics are to work with.
Yeah, we're really proud of the quality that we have, and the digital quality. You know, there were some concerns out there in the industry because digital is technically new. It's been around for 20 years, but now it's really happening with all of the manufacturers now. Most of the manufacturers are dabbling in digital. We just happen to be the first to kind of go crazy and go all in. But we're glad that we did. You know, we've kind of really expanded our artistry base and took some chances, and we're able to do things that maybe in the past we weren't able to do.
Well, thank you so much for choosing me to help make this happen. You know, designing fabric is always like a bucket list thing, but I was like, I'm gonna have to learn a whole new skill set, and I didn't have to in order to make it happen with you guys.
Wow. It's been a blast, and we're so excited, and we wish you all the success with Nocturne. It's beautiful, and we're so glad that we did this too. So thank you.
Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed seeing the process of going from concept to kind of having fabric to the finished product in the end. I hope you found it super informative, and I hope you love Nocturne. Now remember, you can now go order Nocturne over on our website, shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. And if it gets to a point where you see it and it's back ordered, that means we can get more. It might be right away, it might be June. We will have to kind of wait and see on that. It'll depend on how much QT has currently in the warehouse versus if we have to fill from orders that they are going to be getting coming in June for the second run of this collection. All right, make sure you check all that out over at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. Thanks so much, and happy quilting.
We could do whatever. We could put our names together however you would do that.
Yeah, it could be fun.
Like those celebrity people.
We're going to ship us.
Yeah.